Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our continuation of the work on the third section of Discipleship in the New Age, Volume 1. It's called the Six Stages of Discipleship. And the last one that we submitted to you was an expanded version. I've been having a little difficulty somehow either not speaking properly so that all you see is the silent movie effect, or leaving on the screen for sharing something that is not the text, which you will need. Now, I've had 2 days of that. So I'm really hoping somehow that this particular program, which is program number 22, continuing with the Chela in the aura, will be devoid of those mistakes because it takes so long to fix them, you know. But we must persist. It's something about the second ray, you know. The Tibetan surprisingly tells us that the second ray works without let up or leeway. Maybe the first ray comes crashing through sporadically, but the second ray possesses the quality of constant application. And he said, the Tibetan said to Roberto Assagioli, who was of course, a second ray soul, an initiate disciple, there's something like this. He said, you have the will like tempered steel of your second ray soul. So many of you that are listening to these things have that second ray soul, or maybe if you have the second ray monad on the monadic plane, don't think of that ray as weak. Yes, it can be vulnerable and more on the personality level, but once it locks in and drives forward the individual toward the goal, there is a will like tempered steel. Tempered, of course, means that it has been subjected to all kinds of circumstances, so it doesn't last under some and break under others. This is the tempering process. Well, okay. So the last program was about 3 hours and 15 minutes, something like that, once you combined my redo of the last part of the program. It was necessary because, well, you all were staring at this, quite useless, while I was talking about other things. So I try to make this useful for you. And no doubt, there's just nothing like this teaching in the world today, especially in the West. Maybe the Tibetans have something. Well, I shouldn't say maybe. They obviously have a lot that's not translated yet. And secret teachings, they have them. And we have to earn our right to have access to such teachings. Well, I think, that might do for our little segue. The final closing remarks is that of the last program, the number of disciples in an ashram varies constantly, but always there are the three. Now that's the point, who are responsible to the master for all ashramic activity, who are in his closest counsels. You can imagine what a responsibility that would be, and who carry out his plans, leaving him as the monadic inspirational center of the ashram, and the one whose aura is impelling with regard to the radiation of all other auras of lesser disciples, all of them by this time initiates. But there's such an efficiency in hierarchy that it is not allowed that the master should waste his time with students, chelas, who can be handled quite adequately by other and lesser members of the ashram. So anyway, the chain of hierarchy is great and immutable, and the sequences unalterable. We've been reading the 4 or 5 steps by which the master can gradually impress the personality of the individual or the personality of the entire group with which he may be working. And those starting points have been either the monastic permanent atom, which is the lowest point in the spiritual triad and found within the dense physical body of the solar logos upon the highest mental subplane of that dense physical body. And then in response to the Buddhic permanent atom, the master has that. And in response to the atmic permanent atom, the master has that too, and is able to transmit what is needed in a particular sequence, the generalities of which, the symbolism of which remain the same. The unalterable sequences, as DK is telling us. But the exact numbers fluctuate. So that when we say that Christ formed an ashram with 3 central disciples, that's always so. But will there necessarily be 9 others? Likely, perhaps. But when we get to the ranks of those who are related somehow to his ashramic forming, will it always be 70? No. And when we get to those who are interested and who are probationary, they are interested in what the Christ is doing. Will they always be exactly 500? No. There's a sense of proportion conveyed, but not exact numbers. What's more important is the sequences of these various steps. And see, there's one going from the atomic permanent atom for the focus of the spiritual will to the sacrifice petals, to the highest aspects of the etheric vehicle, which are subplane 1 and 2, to the head center and to the center at the base of the spine. So that's deeply within the personality. That's one of the lines of transmission. The earlier line from the or in response to the Buddhic permanent atom or intuitional vehicle of the advanced disciple. And then through the love petals and through the astral body in its highest aspect, where we have idealism, let's say, and imagination, and into the heart center. He doesn't say the heart per se, but since the brain is mentioned in the sequence following this one, maybe the heart as a physical organ too. And then the very first transmission from over which the master has more control than he does over the Buddhic permanent atom or atomic permanent atom. So from the monastic permanent atom, which the master controls, to the knowledge petals of the egoic lotus, to the lower concrete mind, though held steady in the light, to the throat center, and finally to that physical organ we call the brain. Well, these sequences are unalterable. 2 of them seem to end in etheric termini, but one of them ends actually in a dense organ, the brain. Now, these are what we call the technicalities of the ageless wisdom. Okay. And maybe learning these technicalities is not the way for everybody. But you can see how helpful it would be to know them. And Master DK conveys them in his own special form of detailed, organized, illumined teaching. he has, in his method of teaching, a certain quality, which in esoteric psychology too is called meticulous entirety. Now there is a little title or kind of a little phrase, or really just a couple of words that need deep understanding and meditation upon. Okay, friends, I just had a little, no, I won't call it an interruption, but it gives me a chance to practice showing you the screen you should have, instead of me living in a fool's paradise, thinking that everything is quite fine. It looks like everything's okay at the moment. So these sequences, we will all pass through them. We will all be responsive to them to varying degrees. The path of discipleship and initiation is indeed laid out and of long standing. This is some of a great process inspired by Shambhala. We're just going to go through it. But it's best to know what it is we're really going through. And then we will not make avoidable errors. And we will be available for service more rapidly, and a higher quality of service more rapidly than might otherwise be the case. I just, the further I go with Master DK's teaching, the more I tend to respect it. And I just wonder whether that respect, well, I just know it. It will grow and grow. So in the beginning, when you start reading him, thinking with him, you are impressed. And maybe in more than one sense of the word. But do you imagine that you can be impressed still more potently and more potently and more potently as over the years your study proceeds? Well, a little, kind of segue there. This is the day of the Cancer solstice. I probably, shouldn't call it the summer solstice, because in the far south of our planet, it's definitely the winter solstice. On the other hand, if I call it the Cancer solstice, that applies planet-wide. And here we are with the two gates, the lower Cancer, the gate into life for those who must know death that is a kind of death of the higher consciousness. Later that changes, even for cancer. And its opposite, solstice, the gate into life of those who know no death. And the two kinds of life that we're talking about are very different. One is occurring within the dense physical body of the solar logos or planetary logos, and the other is the life of the higher planes, which is much truer life and terminates in the very heart of the monad, where we have the being which we are. So a little bit more here. In considering the theme of the Chela within the Master's aura, says Master Decay. He's recapitulating a little here. We see that the true pledged disciple who has reached the stage of being an accepted disciple, remember, before acceptance is possible, the pledge must be given and adhered to. And so you just have to ask yourself, with all frankness, if you are what's called here a true pledged disciple. Who has reached the stage of the Master's awareness, I'm inserting that, of being an accepted disciple. That Chela passes from point to point within the circumference of a Master's sphere of influence until he, 2 stages later, reaches a period wherein he consciously knows his Master's aura. And the word knows here is not simply an intellectual speculation. It is an energy state. And when it comes over you, and when you're in the heart of it, it's a very definite experience, different from talking about the fact that somewhere on ahead it does exist. He knows. He reaches a period wherein he consciously knows his Master's aura. Now the Tibetan is going to give us something else to think about in regard to what he's just said. He says, now that my brothers, it is a perfectly meaningless phrase, except perhaps the way the word knows was used in older English. Now that, my brothers, is a perfectly meaningless phrase, but it is technically and esoterically correct. Well, we want that, the fact of it, to be factual for ourselves. Now he's going to paraphrase the significance of that phrase: to know his master's aura. It's not just know about, it's some kind of much more intimate, ashramically intimate experience. So I will paraphrase its significance for you in the endeavor to give you some vital implications. Vital, utterly necessary, true, indispensable. And here we have some of these implications. As always, arranged with a high degree of organization. So number one, he is aware not only of the master, but of what is in the master's mind. And this means he is telepathically en rapport with his master. Let's pause there to think about what that state might be, to be telepathically en rapport with one's master. Number two, he is consciously past all inward discussion of what the master wants him to do. He knows the part which he has to play. So there is a certain certainty in service. It doesn't have to be turned over and said, well, it might be this, it might be that. He knows from the telepathic rapport exactly what the master wants him to do. And then number 3, he responds sensitively to the master's aura, not only upon the inner planes of life and in the ashram proper, but also within his physical brain. So it's very much a part of his daily conscious life in the lower worlds. He moves within the aura in his daily physical plane life. Now that is something. So we can see that there is an ever more ashramically intimate relationship with the master and with what the master is transmitting. Certain major radiations. It's good, isn't it, that an increasing certainty comes to the disciple. We don't want to always be in that stage where we're questioning ourselves regarding what we might or might not do. Well, we want to be secure, established workers upon whom the master can really rely. And it is demanding. It is demanding. Now, even in his physical plane life, there is a fivefold process. So let's see, is it progressive within the disciple's consciousness and within the consciousness of the disciplic group? Now, he says it necessarily falls into 5 stages. Of course, that is, in a way, the number of the mind. And from another perspective, the number of the soul. So what are these 5 stages? As even in his daily physical plane life, he is responsive to the auric radiations of the master. Well, okay, we looked at this one. He is telepathically en rapport. His mind and his brain respond to the master's mind, as in the case of AAB. Although, she was working with Master KH as a quite senior disciple initiate in his ashram, still to work with the Tibetan who himself is included in the greater Ray ashram of Master KH. To work with the Tibetan then is to work still in relation to Master KH's Ray ashram. So I wonder if we know what this means. His mind and his brain respond to the master's mind, even in daily physical plane life. So many of us are working hard to achieve what we may be considered to be a special state. But it turns out that we are expected right here on this level of daily physical life to move within the aura of the master. He is therefore mentally aware of the content of the master's mind. This is no small thing. This affects, says the Tibetan, his life and service, and his mind constantly formulates the telepathic impressions into organized formulas, which are then available for directive processes. And I think there's something about our abstract mind when we can begin to reach that via antikarana building that allows us to formulate that which impresses us from the master into organized formulas. In a way, the abstract mind is a formulaic mind. You kind of wonder about, one of the great and most famous formulas, there are so many, but in the 20th century was Einstein's E, energy, equals mass times the speed of light squared. So many brilliant scientists have wondered how he ever came up with such a thing. Obviously, it was projected to him from an ashram with which he worked in affiliation. But then it had to be rendered into a formula. And perhaps did he not use then the abstract mind to do that? So sometimes thinking of the abstract mind as the formulaic mind, the mind which allows the formation of formulas from intuitions or higher impressions, is indicative of a truth. So many of the intuitions that might be impressed upon us might remain in those higher worlds or unformulated, and therefore inaccessible to the people who might benefit from them. But when the abstract mind gets into the act, useful formulas can be generated. Whoa. What's going on here? I don't want that. By the abstract mind. Okay. And then I would try to bring this all back to where it belongs. I guess it helps to have a wonderfully efficient secretary who can handle many of these formatting details. Anyway, he is moving within the aura. DK says something interesting, however, about the disciple with the word relatively. Being at this stage relatively free from glamour, and remember, at this stage, he has to be an initiate disciple. He is, in all likelihood, one who has taken the third degree. So being at this stage relatively free from glamour, he is able to respond from the angle of sensitivity and feeling from the astral body, which is no longer beleaguered by the usual glamours, and consequently able to bring through the master's plans, at least his share of them, otherwise we go too far, onto the astral plane, where they are keenly desired, where their execution is keenly desired. Now let's see what we're looking at here. He's moving within the aura of the master, and it's going on in his daily life. And one of the factors is the telepathic rapport. The next factor, he is mentally aware of the content of the master's mind? Well, are we? DK has told us so much about what he wants to see accomplished and what he foresees as utterly necessary. So even if we're not quite aware of that content, he has given us much of the content. Living this life on the physical plane, he is relatively free from glamour and can bring whatever impression he has down to the astral plane without worrying that anymore it will be distorted. And as a result, he uses the feeling apparatus of the astral plane and aspires, well, as every magician does, towards the effective manifestation of that by which he is impressed. Etherically, he can begin to work with and use the ashramic force, which his master and his soul, both working through the causal body, can make available to him to use upon the physical plane. He becomes what is called a projector of force and can then produce results upon the physical plane. And, you know, so many times when we want to produce results, it's by human hands and human feet, you know. It's our outer organs which produce the results. But now there seems to be a very high etheric component to the results to be produced, and this is somewhat taken up in the last 4 rules or magic that involve the etheric body. A projector of force. Does that mean something to us? Well, certainly there's a lot of stabilization that is required of us before we can step into this kind of condition. And finally, his brain becomes consciously aware of the simultaneity of the 4 processes, the above 4 processes, so that he passes into a new phase of conscious discipleship. consciousness is so much a part of going into this new phase. It's not just what you can do with what you have. It is the consciousness of what is being done through his own soul and the master's sphere of influence. We might say combined with the master's sphere of influence, the plan lies open before him. I suppose any of us have a bit of a notion as to what the plan is. All you have to do is look at the great invocation, let light descend on earth, may Christ return to earth. The will aspect. Let purpose guide the little wills of men, the purpose which the masters no one serves. So to facilitate that guidance of the human being by purpose, and then finally let light and love and power restore the plan on earth, and it will be done, this restoration, very much by human hands and human feet. It's so remarkable that there is this collection of benevolent souls who are so intent on the welfare of humanity and, by extension, of the lower kingdoms of nature. They're working all the time to make sure things go aright. So through his own soul and the master's sphere of influence, the plan lies open before him. I would point out that this is not only a higher stage of discipleship, but presupposes initiate understanding. No one is going to be a Chela within the master's aura unless that individual is an initiate disciple and has taken the transfiguration initiation. So there will be passing into a new stage of discipleship as he moves in everyday life consciously within the aura of his master. And I'll just mark this out in terms of 5 stages. And I think I'll use that color I use when something is pretty well manifested. He has become a formulator, you see. And those formulations are in a position to help others. And it's curious to me that he's only relatively free from glamour. It says that even after the third degree, which is required of this stage, there can be some vestigial glamours. What was it that made the rich young man turn sadly away when the Christ asked him to sell all he owns, give the proceeds to the poor, and follow the Christ? What was it, if not some high form of glamour? The feeling, perhaps, that one knew better than the teacher. Perhaps that. Whatever it was not at that time, though later, yes, heart and soul given to the great teacher, who is a very, in a way, demanding teacher. Ashramic force is becoming available to him. And that is a development which we do not expect to find in anyone who is not so close to the aura of the master and to the aura of the ashram inspired by the aura of the master. A new phase of conscious discipleship is achieved, where we can know something mental about this new phase. But I think we see how important it is that we forge ahead into experiential truth rather than simply cognitive truth. And at this point, finally, the plan lies open before the Chela. It takes a while, and but the time comes when he can work with certainty, at least about his own aspect of the plan, because that plan lies open with regard to his own part within it. Now, to go on, The neophyte knows that the goal of the occultist, the neophyte is not yet the occultist, is to work with forces, rightly directing them, we might say. He fails, however, to recognize that this may not be consciously done until, and now we're going to be given a list of requirements of what it takes to work with forces. 1, 2, 3, 4. Until what? He has been a long time, or has for a long time been simply a channel. I would have you reflect upon that thought. The Master says, the attainment of the capacity to be a pure channel and an unimpeded distributor is the first goal, and it takes a long time. So we find that we look for the state called transparency, which is even more lucid than translucence. The attainment of the capacity to be a pure channel and an unimpeded distributor is the first goal, and it takes a long time. The force usually dispensed by a disciple until the channel stage is automatic and established is normally colored by personality distinctiveness, even if a high-grade personality. The time has come when the disciple can at will distribute the ashramic and group soul energy in their pure state. And how do we become aware of that? By ridding ourselves of various glamours and illusions and chaotic conditions, etherically and physically. So this is where transparency enters, and decentralization. If the disciple is still one of those who too frequently has his eye upon his little self, well, he cannot be a pure channel. So that's the first step, and let's call it this. We'll say steps on the way to working successfully at distributing forces. What's the next one? It's a still higher state. He has therefore to distribute energy and not force. There is much confusion in the minds of many disciples about this matter. Until a man is an initiate of high degree, he seldom dispenses energy. An initiate of high degree, well, an initiate is a third degree initiate, and of high degree, we might consider the fourth initiation. He works with forces as they concern the three worlds. It has been said esoterically that when the disciple can distribute the four forces and make the seven notes heard, each note of the seven having a fourfold expression, he is not able to work with energy. When he works with energy, he works with seven and not with 28. And I would, he says, reflect upon this. This is a difficult statement. I'm not sure that I can come up with too much regarding its true meaning. Here we have two perspectives from the old commentary. It seems to me involve the four aspects of the personality, with the personality being the combinative fourth, and something about the four elements as well. I'm not sure whether we can think of this as relating to five aspects of the soul, but from another point of view, we have four circles of petals, and those fours may be involved. So the disciple can do much, but apparently not distribute energy per se. And yet, the work of working with forces is not a low thing. It has to be consciously done. And of course, there is so much discussion of the Shambhala force as well as of the Shambhala energy. So being a channel is one thing. And then first, a channel for force. and then a channel for energy as a high initiate of high degree, and then esoterically, well, that always involves something above the dense physical body of either the planetary or solar logos. If you think about a personality, there are 4 forces, and each one of the aspects of the personality can present in a 7-fold manner. And each of those 7 will relate to one of the expressions of the personality. If we look at it this way, etheric, physical, astral, lower mental, and then the final personality, the 4th. But at this stage, the disciple, though perhaps doing something of value, is not doing what the higher initiate can do. To be a Chela within the aura, I don't think you yet have to be an initiate of the 4th degree. But when you are working with energy and not with 4 times 7, which is 28. You're dealing with some kind of inclusive 7, which embraces all the usual 28. Every plane will have 7 layers. The etheric physical has 7 layers, the astral, 7. The mental, if we combine the higher and lower mind as being part of the dense physical body of the solar logos, has 7, and the personality can present in a 7-fold mode. That would make 28. Maybe he will elaborate here a little. I would add that the 28 belong to the 7. And when the disciple works with 7, he normally and automatically releases the 28. Working under the impression of the 7-ray qualities. Well, we have to admit that that is an obscure quotation from the old commentary. Yes, but I am recalling different places where spiritually the 21 in relation to 3 is signaled, and more materially, the 28 in relation to the personality is signaled. We need a kind of synthetic way of working, gathering the many particular instances under a major 7. And then the 28 can be released. Well, obviously, if we can be really honest about it, more to contemplate. Wouldn't you say so? So the occultist, whoop, there we go. The occultist is first learning to work with forces, then with energies, and before he can really be the occultist, this is what the student must do. Looks like he can't even work with forces until he becomes a channel, until, becomes a channel. And then he has to learn, following that, not only to distribute forces, but to distribute energies. And then another point, he has to learn to the uses of distinction and of synthesis, taking things apart and seeing that in fact really they are one. And herein lies a potent occult hint of special use to workers. DK does exercise us. Okay, so here, distinction is of the mind. Synthesis is of the intuition far more fully. So we face a world in which there are countless possible distinctions. Can we consult or draw upon the synthesis petals of the egoic lotus and see that all these distinctions are actually practical but illusory? That seems to be something that could be conferred at the 3rd degree, and is something we have to practice. The 10,000 things, really millions and millions of discrete perceptions, distinct from each other, are but one arising from that which is synthetic, that is, from pure being itself. The uses of distinction and of synthesis. What else must he do or be aware of before he can be a successful worker, a transparent channel with the directing of force, and later with the directing of energy, about which Master DK says there is considerable confusion. Well, I don't doubt that for a minute. Yeah. Okay. He is aware of the dangers incident to the untrained neophyte endeavoring to distribute forces, to direct so-called energies, if that is what he's doing, in a specific and particular direction. He realizes his goal is to be a channel for a long time through purity of life, correct orientation, and non-criticism. We might call it Ray 2, Ray 1, and Ray 3. At least criticism applies to the third ray, purity to the second ray, and correct orientation and treading the way thither to the first ray. So I'm going to bring this into maybe the correct colors. Of course, I can't do that all the time, unfortunately. And non-criticism. Analysis, yes. Benevolent analysis on behalf of the one for whom the analysis is occurring. This correct orientation, well, first of all, the same kinds of dangers are existing for the magician, very definitely. And the true magician is always aware that he is playing with fire. This correct orientation involves a paradox with which all disciples must wrestle. The wrestling hold is considered to be connected with the second ray. At least I think, according to Jeffrey Hodson. So they must wrestle with this, i.e., to be oriented to the soul and consequently to the ashram, and to be oriented at the same time to humanity. It's a Geminian problem. It's a dual orientation, and the hierarchy itself faces such a problem, because they, as we have seen, let me just make sure that you're seeing what you should, yes. On our way to completing the triangle between Shambhala hierarchy and humanity, that dual orientation is always to be found. Well, how does it say, to work above and help below? Something of that nature. We seek that which is above, and at the same time we have to work below with those who are up and coming. Now, here he deals with another phase of discipleship. Only disciples close to the master's heart, technically understood, and therefore, and we might say, perhaps the Chela within the master's heart, stage 6, maybe, and therefore consciously aware of his aura, have the right, I had almost said privilege, to direct force in specific directions. So even though the direction of energy supersedes the direction of force, still the directing of force in the right way is a high act. When their status is not that, their task is to act as channels for the distribution of energy in general and universal, but not in a specific manner. Well, somehow that's important, because there is a difference between specific energy direction and a general and universal channelship or transparency that is not specific. It's a bit like in esoteric healing, you have the general formula for it, but also you have some very specific operations that, if you know what you're doing, you might be able to use. So let's keep that in mind, that energy can be released in a general and universal outflow, but not specifically until one really knows what one is doing. Okay, those are 4 points which must be attained before the occult direction of force and energy can be properly executed. Be the channel, be transparent, try to keep the flow that comes through you from being involved in your personality coloring. Distribute energy and not force. But we've also learned that we can distribute energy in a general and universal sense. And then this very demanding section from the old commentary, the 28 involves pretty much the personality. When we deal with 21, we're dealing more with the soul nature. Or let us say the triadal nature with 7 subplanes on each one of the planes. 21. A master. And to a far higher extent, we can see the reverence with which or in which the Tibetan holds the Christ, and to a far higher extent, far higher, the Christ suffers more from those in his own household than those in the outer world. Well, I wonder if that isn't the case even in family situations. This is something really to consider. It was those closest to the Christ which caused his suffering, and one of them from the story apparently betrayed him, and yet that betrayal was all part of the fulfilling of the law. Amazing how much the Christ respected the Jewish law of the time, which I'm sure he considered divinely inspired and necessary for fulfillment. I'm reminded of a line from King Lear, that great Shakespearean play. And Lear says, how sharper than a serpent's tooth it is to have an ungrateful child. And of course, his 2 daughters, Goneril and Regan, prove themselves to be faithless and disrespectful and really not caring about his true welfare at all. His work is more impeded by the advanced aspirants than by the intelligent thinkers. And by advanced aspirant, if every true aspirant has taken the first degree, I suppose we are talking about those who are approaching the second, well, even the third degree. This is important and may be unexpected by many. Bear this in mind at this time. It was not the cruelty of the outer world of men which caused the depths of sorrow to the Christ when on earth. And is it so? It seems so, that the Christ did experience the depths of sorrow. We know, or have been told, that in the Garden of Gethsemane, his disciples were too tired or too lazy or too unknowing to keep watch with him as he struggled with the will of God, the planetary logos. So, and he agonized in that garden. Perhaps perhaps somewhat because the disciples representing humanity were asleep. So not so much the cruelty of the outer world, which he would come to expect, but even becoming a sixth degree initiate can suffer much more in the depths of sorrow than we might suppose. It was his own disciples, plus the massed sorrow spread over the entire cycle of life, past, present, and future, of humanity. The Christ could foresee how humanity would suffer, and he acquiesced to the will of God, the planetary logos, in order, among other things, to lessen that suffering. Obviously, he could see ahead into the lives of his disciples. He knew their iniquities, great and small, and he knew how they would suffer. He knew how humanity would suffer. And he was able to somehow grasp the tremendous responsibility that would be put upon him if he acquiesced to the will of God in that garden. So let us not suppose that a master, a Chohan, a high Chohan, will be devoid of suffering. Such apparently is not the case. In fact, the ability to feel still more deeply than may seem possible belongs to that disciple, and it belongs to us as we move forward upon the path. We really have very little idea about the psychological state of these great beings. Christianity has gone so far as to make of Christ something not even human, the absolute God-man, conqueror, on his white horse, conquering all evil. But the Tibetan tells us, no, this is not a picture of truth. So we can see how much we can ponder. Okay. Disciples gravitate into world groups, and many of them are doing far more efficient work than those gathered into esoteric groups. He is distinguishing between the two, isn't he? Well, many of these disciples have given up their former knowledge of their affiliation with the hierarchy. The advanced, accepted disciple has always his own group, which he gathers around him for active and creative work. Now, there's one of the ways that you can test your fitness for accepted discipleship, and whether, even if you should be an accepted disciple, are you in the category of the advanced accepted disciple? Accepted disciples are members of groups and also are directing groups. Maybe that's what it means by has his own group. Always has his own group. I would remind you of this. The gauge of a disciple's capacity lies in his influence through pen, word of mouth, and personal influence upon other people. We forget sometimes, I think, or we just think of joining a group and not really of taking up the responsibility of managing and guiding a group, or we can use the word directing a group. That will be an important hint as to where we stand. Under the law of correspondence, there is ever a numerical relation with established numerical entities. Well, I've been calling this numerical affinity. The 6 stages of discipleship are naturally related through numerical affinity to the 6 schools of Indian philosophy, which were in reality the 6 seed schools for all philosophical surmise and work. There are, okay. There are not 6 types of ashram corresponding to the 6 stages of discipleship, because there are 7 ashrams, 1 for each ray type, and all 6 stages of discipleship are related to all the ashrams, and all the 7 ray types express at some point, at some stage of their unfoldment upon the path of discipleship. These 6 steps towards the center. From another point of view, though, there may even be 7 stages of discipleship. If we include that the kind of final stage that we call the blending of the lights, where the Chela is really, or has really, become the master. The centers, as used by the disciple in his unfolding process, are dependent upon the ray type to a great extent, but it is not my intention to take up this subject of the centers in this series of instructions. I shall be dealing with the subject at some length. See how well planned it is. at some length in the final part of a treatise on the 7 rays, which I suppose is the rays and the initiations. I think so. Well, the treatment that Master Decay has given the centers is voluminous, so much so that he even asked his Chelas to be careful about gathering the material together, because used unwisely by others, it could cause harm. I would like, however, to make clear this point, that the Master never uses a disciple's centers as distributing agencies for force. In the last analysis, the centers are, when functioning correctly, reservoirs of force and distributors of energy, colored by specific quality and a certain note, vibration, and strength. Well, this is the occult view of what the centers really are. Sometimes a disciple may have the idea that the Master is using him through his centers. But apparently, according to Master Decay, this is not the case. On the final stages of the path of discipleship, they are entirely controlled by the soul via the head center, the Master directing center. But it should be borne in mind that after the 4th initiation and the disappearance of the causal body, there is no form, aspect, or vehicle which can hold the disciple a prisoner or any way limited. After the 3rd initiation, the lower centers have no control whatsoever over the outer mechanism of response. From the standpoint of the highest occult training, and when the disciple is in the ashram itself, the centers are viewed as simply channels for energy until the time of the 3rd initiation, they assume temporary importance in the training process, because it is through them that the disciple learns the nature of energy, its distinction from force. It is through them that the disciple learns the nature of energy, its distinction from force, and the methods of distribution. The latter here, the distribution of energy, being one of the last stages in the training process. Okay. Now, this is very important for those people who claim a high initiation for themselves. After the third initiation, the lower centers have no control whatsoever over the outer mechanism of response. And so frequently among such people, the lower centers still seem to control. But from the higher or highest occult training, from that standpoint, the centers are viewed simply as channels for energy now. So I just want to emphasize this, that if one is going to claim the third initiation, one had better be aware that the lower centers, solar plexus, sacral, some of the earlier energies of the base of the spine, do not control his outer mechanism of response, which I suppose is the etheric physical body, though from another point of view, you might look at the personality itself as an outer mechanism of response. Finally, how are the centers viewed? Simply as channels for energy. Now we have to get used to the idea of working with the centers and working in a distributive manner eventually. And we realize that the methods of distribution are in fact one of the later stages in the training of the disciple. Well, let's see, friends. What do we have? Kind of a new section here. And it takes us to page 764, just a few pages, but I think we're on 762 now. So I think we are at the point where we can cut this and I think finish the next 2 pages regarding the Chela in the aura. So let's do that. Up to 762. This has been a long section. Let's see if this is correct. I have to go still further. All right. So this takes us to 762. And maybe we have been successful, hopefully, in offering a program without these distracting and time-consuming mistakes, which I have of late been likely to make. I suppose it's just the fatigue factor, which does exist. And this is page 20, or rather, we're dealing with the 21st, the first day of the Cancer solstice. And now we will begin with program 23, and it will probably just be a couple of pages, but that can take a while, as we've come to recognize. And without being overly optimistic, I will just say XX in terms of when I'll be able to do this. Now, we all must realize that one reading of this very dense esoteric material is far from adequate. When you sign up with Master DK, you're signing up for a lifetime of study and meditation, and of course, application in service. We cannot say, oh yeah, I read that. Well, many people do say that, if they even bother to read. And Master DK enjoins us, read more carefully. Do we do that? Or do we not do that? See, if we hadn't read carefully, we would look at the distribution of energy as a very difficult and final process. But we wouldn't notice, perhaps, that earlier on, there is a distribution of energy in a general and universal sense, which is not anywhere near as demanding as the specific targeted distribution of energy. Also, I want to say that there's so many things to do, and we don't easily, perhaps at first, know what it is that the divine plan has given us to do. But once we find out, then indeed, indeed, we had better do it. And have patience, because we know that the path of occultism is long, though it will save much time in the long run, and will allow us to serve those who have not chosen the path of occultism, the path of initiation, the path which leads directly to true participation in the ranks of hierarchy. Training, repetition, orderly repetition until we really get it. And that is what we are destined to pass through. And the kind of multiple definition of words, we have to come to the point where words are really meaningful to us in terms of the experiences that they suggest. And further, it's quite impossible to take the third degree if the lower centers are controlling our outer mechanism of response. Well, there's so many ancillary subjects. Here's one that Master DK does not take up. The different processes in the different ashrams, but since the second ray is the major ray for our second major solar system on our planet with its second ray soul, it seems justifiable to work from the second ray angle. And always watch out for the numerical affinity, because some very interesting correspondences can arise through it. Remember also that if you are a true accepted disciple, you will have, in a sense, your own group, and you will be the inspiration of that group. Eventually, in lives to come, if one's own group is one of the schools of meditation, then one will be responsible to the ashram but not to the power of the vote, as it were. You can't have an ashramic leader being voted out of his office. It is his method of contacting the higher impulses, and he is the originator. It is a thorny path, and some of the thorns we barely suspect. So different tasks are accorded to us, and we can be successful in relation to them. We cannot attempt all things within the ashram. In these matters of 4 and 7 and 28 verses 3 and 7 and 21, just beyond the outlook for numerical affinity, we'll find this, I think, in a treatise on cosmic fire. And above all, as we move forward, let us not, through our own ignorance, become an impediment and a source of sorrow to the master. That is not necessary. Sorrow belongs on this planet. This is the planet of releasing sorrow and purifying pain. You say, well, how did I get here? But it may be undertaking something, some unfinished business from the previous solar system, and looks like you and I volunteered for that kind of work. Well, you know, every time you go over one of these sentences, you can gather something from it. And the more you put together from what Master DK has said, the more there is to be put together. Fortunately for us, he has covered a lot of ground, and we can only imagine what the case will be with the third installment, however long it may last. Okay, well, 762. 2764, just 2 pages. And then we'll be finished with this section on being a dweller within the master's aura and within the ashramic aura. How much have we absorbed? That's up to us. That's up to us. We can't absorb it all. I oftentimes say absorbitol is a second-rate pain reliever because that second-rate type just is dissatisfied with its highest attainments in the field of knowledge. I guess it helps to try to have a sense of humor about some of these things, because the path is long, requires deep patience, contains much suffering, many thorns, and many obligations. But somehow, my friends, we will manage. Okay, well, this program is somewhat over 2 hours, maybe not too much. And we have to finish up this section on the Chela within the Master's aura. So Tuya and I and all the communications team wish you love, many blessings, successful study, deep meditation, and ongoing recognition of what your service really is, and the will and skill in action to carry it out. Okay, we'll get back to it. Will it be tonight? Usually when I say it will be, it won't be. But maybe if I say it won't be, it will be. So let's see, another 2 pages in part number 8. Part number 9, looming ahead, and about 9 pages long. Well, and that's the end. And I love the way he ends. I know you're not supposed to jump to the end, but, and so I bring to an end this series of instructions. And my responsibility in this connection is ended. Yours now begins. Well, those are direct words, and we have to see how seriously we will take them. So in this whole section on the 6 stages of discipleship, maybe another 9 pages exists, plus the 2 preceding, page 764 to 773. Okay, friends. We'll be back with you before long. Bye for now.